Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending number 8 in the ShareVault webinar series, Getting Ready for a Bio-Pharma Partnering Deal with Linda Pullan of Pullan Consulting. This webinar is sponsored by ShareVault, the innovation leader in secure document sharing. ShareVault is used extensively by life sciences companies worldwide for a variety of secure document sharing applications, including typical due diligence scenarios, as well as other applications of controlled document sharing with third parties. My name is John Badger, and I'm VP of Marketing and Product Management here at ShareVault. I would like to thank all of you for joining our webinar today. The presenter today is Linda Pullan of Pullan Consulting, a consultancy specifically focused on biopharma partnering, both in licensing and out licensing. Linda applies more than 20 years of drug industry business experience to helping her clients get deals done. In today's webinar, you'll learn the basics of preparing for a partner deal, as well as some valuable tips and key insights based on her deep understanding of biopharma deal making. During today's webinar, Linda will describe the essentials of preparing for a partnering deal. In the end, she'll recommend getting started with your preparations for partner due diligence well in advance of the deal itself. You might think that this is an expensive piece of advice, but ShareVault has a special offering called ShareVault EverReady, a solution that starts at less than $200 per month that allows you to easily set up your data room right now so that you're ready to get started with due diligence as soon as the need arises. In fact, we began offering ShareVault EverReady specifically to promote the best practice of deal readiness. And to make ShareVault EverReady even more affordable, we have a special promotion code for this webinar. At the end of the webinar, you'll be given a code that you can mention to your salesperson to get a 25% discount on your first 6 months. So be sure to stay on to the end. During the presentation, your individual audio will be muted in order to minimize background noise. You can submit questions via the question box located in your GoToWebinar control panel. We typically receive quite a few questions, which helps to make our webinars both interactive and relevant. We've reserved plenty of time after the presentation during which Linda will answer your submitted questions, but we'll keep the full duration of the webinar to just 1 hour. Now let's get started. I'd like to introduce Linda Pullan of Pullan Consulting, who will begin the presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to have you joining us here on the webinar, and we'll get right into sort of thinking about how you get ready for a deal. And one of the first things to do in getting ready for a deal is to go back and think about first principles. Do you really want to partner now or not? And I'm all for partnering. That's what I focus on, and it can be a great way to raise non-dilutive funding, to offload expenses, to bring the experts from the other company, and to bring their credibility to validate your opportunity. And statistically, big pharma partners do increase the chance of getting to an approval. But it is also a downside. Your vision of your long-term business could be reduced by giving up control of the asset and its upside. And there's nobody else who has the passion that you will have for your own assets. So it's good to rethink whether now is the time to partner or not. And that depends on how it fits into the vision for your future of your company, what's best for the product, what your alternatives are, and I know today it is very hard to get alternative funding. So think about if the early deal terms are sufficient to offset the loss of later possible profits. And think about how it all fits together and what you want to accomplish in your company. But let's assume you do want to go forward. You want to start thinking about what your opportunity might be worth. That's part, but only a small part, of the process of getting to a deal. So the value of your asset depends on the kind of data you've built up, the kind of story you've built up. Hypotheses, mechanisms can be faddish and be hot, and that can certainly drive value. The more advanced and robust your data is, drives value. Increasingly today, partners are looking for small companies to tell the big company, how this drug will get to market. So establishing that you're on mechanism, that you understand how to set a dose in clinical trials, and you understand which patient populations will be treated, is increasingly important even in very early deals. Lead time is a tremendous advantage, competitive advantage. Other barriers to competition is a component of value. Having backups and follow-ups or a flow of drug candidates or a platform can be a big part of value. Other companies being interested, either validating you by their partnership or, even better, multiple bidders for this asset certainly drive up value. And other deals in the space can help drive value up too. In all negotiations, one of your sources of power is having an alternative. So that's an important point here as well. It's good to remember that both partners and investors are looking to see their money applied in a way that increases value rather than stretches out a horizon. They're looking for these inflection points. So thinking about not just stage, but the demonstration of your potential and the removal of risk. Efficacy is tops, safety and market differentiation are key components. So, okay, we know the drivers of value, but how do you calculate value? There are multiple ways to estimate value in deal terms, etc. None of them are perfect. Some costs are what was spent, but the partner may say you spent too much or that isn't relevant. Their cost to replicate and the gain of lead time is valuable, but again, it's only an estimate. You can look at comparable deals, but nothing is ever really the same. You can look at other companies and their valuations. We calculate all these, and we also calculate discounted cash flows, time and risk adjusted future sales, but these models are only as good as the assumptions you put in. So ultimately, I like to say it's like buying a painting to hang over a sofa. The decision to buy it or not is driven by whether I like it and whether it fits my decor. It's not necessarily a rational process, and it's also like bidding at an auction. You can get excited, and the price can go up when there are multiple bidders. So competition to buy it is a big driver of increased value. And setting up for that competition is a process that you can help manage, and you can help encourage multiple bidders if you think in advance and line up both multiple parties ready to make decisions and a forcing function to get them to make a decision. But let's talk a bit about deal averages. Deal averages are a useful way to think about deals and the value of your opportunity, but it's important to remember that they are averages of only those deals that have published, disclosed terms. And those deals tend to be with deals that are, quote, material to a public company, meaning they're big, or deals that everybody wants to tout, meaning they're big, so there's a bias upward. So there's a lot more deals that are done that may not have press releases or may have press releases that don't disclose the dollar amounts. And so when you see all these median deal numbers, average deal numbers, they're averaging things that are visible. They're not averaging the invisible, but the invisible are very real. So keep that in mind when you look at deal averages and compare your deal to the deal averages. I like these typical terms that Deloitte Recap provided in 2009. They're a bit dated, but they give a pretty good feel for what my experience across stages show. In my experience as of late, the upfronts for early deals are a bit lower than this. The total dollar amounts, counting all the milestones, are higher than what these numbers. My experience says they're higher. And the royalties that I've seen are a bit lower than what's here. But these aren't bad estimates to use as sort of another data point in thinking about the value of your opportunity. But again, remember that there's huge variation in range. So these are only an average, a typical, a slice, and not necessarily representative of what you would see. Indeed, those were averaged over a number of years. Here's some data from Evaluate Pharma showing a year-by-year trend, and one of the important messages is that in the soft economy and with the many patent expirations, Big Pharma's been out hunting for late-stage opportunities, and they have driven down what they're paying for upfronts for phase 1 and phase 2 in the blue and green bars in recent years. Definitely a decline in the upfronts for earlier stage deals, and I think this probably applies even more so to preclinical deals for which there isn't data. Another component of value are royalties. Indeed, if successful, royalties are the biggest dollar amount in the typical deal. They're way out in time and they're somewhat improbable, but boy, they can be big when they hit. And so having some sense of what normal royalties are is a good thing to have in mind as you go forward to think about a deal. This set of data is from Deloitte Recap, and it's effective royalty rate. What they've done is they've taken a weighted average of the royalties at different tiers of net sales. So for instance, a typical deal might have, for an early stage opportunity, a 5% royalty at 0 to 250 million annual net sales. And when your opportunity sells between 250 and 500 million in annual net sales, you get a 6% royalty, and over 500 million would be a 7% royalty. And in this example, the effective royalty would be 6%, or 5.5%, because it would be a weighted average of the 5% at 0 to 250 and the 6% at 250 to 500 million. So that gives you some sense of the kinds of numbers that you might expect in royalties for deals. It's important to note probably that royalties don't have the huge variation that, say, upfronts and totals deal that do. They tend to be more consistent, but antibodies tend to get higher royalties at later stages. Okay, so we've talked a bit about that you want to do a deal. You have some clues as to what it might be worth. What can you expect in the process? Unfortunately, what you can expect in the process is that you have to kiss a lot of frogs to fry in that print. And the big pharmas are looking at lots and lots of opportunities to find their deals. This is just an approximation of what's happening, but let's say that the typical pharma might see 500 to 1,000 opportunities in a given therapeutic area, say oncology. And only some of these go on to non-confidential meeting. Only some of those go on to CDAs. There's a big gate at the request for diligence. That is, in the pharmaceutical company, it takes a lot of resources to perform an evaluation of diligence, and that's typically a decision point. So that's another reduction in numbers of opportunities looked at. Some of these go on to term sheets. Some of these go on to drafting the full agreement. And even at the drafting of the full agreement, there can be attrition. That is, not all things that start drafting make it to the signing. So it's important to remember that as you're looking forward to your deal, and it's important to keep alternatives flowing, if at all humanly possible, even when you're negotiating the final agreement, because alternatives are your negotiating power. Another point is it takes a long time. Unfortunately, it really does. So a CDA might take a month. It takes time for the other side to schedule their team meetings, get their clinician at the same time as their preclinical and their tox person. It may take a month for a decision process to evaluate all the information and say, yes, we want to go forward to formal diligence. And from that point, from the point when they decide, yes, we want this thing, yes, we're committed to doing a formal diligence effort on it, it takes 6 to 12 months to get to a signature. That's through the diligence, through the term sheet negotiations, and through the full agreement negotiations. It's important to remember as well that you want it to be as fast as possible. You don't want to be slowing things down, so you want to be ready for each turn of the crank, because deals fall apart if they drag on. Champions go away or something else happens, and unfortunately, longer time is your enemy. So let's talk a bit about diligence. Diligence, or sometimes called due diligence, is the getting to know your asset in greater detail, confirming what you've been told, understanding all the issues, and planning for the future. One other important point is that inside the pharmaceutical company, it also serves as the time when all their functions buy into their assumptions and their model and are committed to the capability to take it forward. So it takes time. I think it's important to remember from the small company perspective that they may not get it all right. They may not understand everything, and it's your obligation to help guide them through the learning curve. It's a hard thing to appreciate nuances and what's truly different about an asset if you're not an expert in the field. So if this is outside their field of expertise or a new approach, you really want to make sure that they're getting it. You want to provide your experts, provide overview presentations, you want to answer questions, you want to spend a lot of time. So it is a big resource commitment for them. It's also a big resource commitment for you. It's great to get ready in advance, and ShareVault is a good example of that. If you have your electronic data room up and ready before it's needed, it'll save you a bit of time. It will help you look professional. If you look really great at this, they may assume that indeed you have done it before with somebody else, and that's a sign of competition. It's hard to persuade people that there is competition if it doesn't look like you're ready and together in all of this. Indeed, often pharma partners don't believe there's competition even when there is, because there's so much bluffing in the industry that they don't give that much credit. So a good electronic data room is a good indicator of your professionalism and your being ready for a deal. You set up the folders for all your presentations, publications, IP, contract. One of the nice things is you can stage the sharing of the most sensitive information, and the ShareVault system allows you to assign access on a document-by-document or folder-by-folder basis, and you can change that as you go along. And one point is you can set this up in a way that mirrors both the type of information you have and the audience you're addressing. So you could, for instance, divide information up by here's stuff for the preclinical expert, here's stuff for the toxicology expert, here's stuff for the regulatory expert, and you're in control. So now you've gotten through diligence or are doing diligence in parallel, and negotiations are about to begin. Are you ready? One of the truths I've sort of learned the hard way is that you only get what you want if you're really clear in what you want and you're very consistent in all your behaviors, consistent with that desire, with that goal. So part of negotiations is getting your act together, the inside battle, and we'll talk about a few of these points, getting your thoughts together and thinking about your potential partner. So one of the critical points is, what is the goal of this deal? And it's very useful to have this almost as a mantra. You know, the purpose of this deal is to advance the molecule. The purpose of this deal is to provide us an insurance policy against the failure of other opportunities. Or the purpose of this deal is to get funding for the next 2 years. That nice short summary of the purpose of the deal is very useful as you go forward. You can sort of check options and decisions that come up later in negotiations against this key component of what am I doing this for? That's a very useful thing, and useful to have the whole team really have consensus on this, because again, you only get what you want if everything you do is consistent with that goal. So you don't want mixed messages. Okay, BATNA, this is a term common to negotiations. It's called best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's really, what will you do if you do not get this deal? Ideally, you build alternatives, multiple partners, plans for your own development, and you have that in mind so that, again, when things come up, you can judge the opportunity for a particular set of terms against your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Then we're going to talk about wants and needs, the things you must have and the things you'd like to have, but you might be willing to trade away. And then think about your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for this negotiation. So wants and needs. This is a very useful concept because it's great to start out talking to your partner about your wants and needs. It's good to have them prioritized. It's good to have them not be, I have to have $140 million. That's not a very persuasive statement. But a persuasive statement is, in order to maximize the value of this asset, I'm going to need to spend for the next set of clinical trials, and that's what I want in this deal. That's a much more persuasive statement. So avoid making them positions. I watched that pawn shop show, and they often say 250, 275, 265. That's not a very good way to negotiate a pharma biotech deal. You want to make conceptual arguments, not just toss numbers back and forth. So think about your wants and needs, money now or later, resources, options and flexibility. That's an often underappreciated one. Providing flexibility to your partner is of tremendous value, and you need to capture that value. So think about all these things, the validation they bring, and what you think is most important and what you might be able to swap away. And remember, you can bundle things both to get and to give. One of the things I really like is to get the partner to sell you. So ask for a capabilities presentation. Ask for an understanding of how they're going to maximize your asset. Understand their pipeline and how they're going to think about things. For example, if you have an asset that has multiple indications, it's really important to have a discussion about how they're going to develop multiple indications. Do they see the priority the same way you do? You're weighing and judging them, and you're getting them to get into the psychology of being part of this deal, and both of those are great things. Go out and look at the history of their deals. Whatever they've done in the past is much easier for them to do again. If they've done an option in the past, they probably would at least consider one again. The kinds of terms and structures they've used in the past are much easier to get approved again. So that's a good thing to have up to date when you start a discussion. And one of the things about a discussion is that you're starting a discussion from the very first meetings. Again, you're conveying what's for sale, you're conveying what you want right when you begin talking to them. So having that clear in mind is really helpful. Think about their strengths and weaknesses. Why do they need this? What can they bring? How rich is their pipeline? What are their competitive pressures? Who's their competitor? All those things can help you bargain as well. And it's lovely to think of their wants and needs and their BATNA and how that all fits with yours. Deals get done when there is a good strategic fit between the parties. And the maximization of your asset is really often based upon a shared vision for how to go forward. So, okay, you've thought about it, you understand your position, you've tried to understand their position, you're set to go into negotiations. How do you begin? I like to think of beginning as starting with a discussion about the aims of your negotiation, those goals of what you want, statements of your wants and needs. It's an exploration to begin with to see if you line up. If you're starting with numbers, you want to start higher than you'll end up, but don't be unreasonable. They'll not appreciate stratospheric, unjustifiable numbers, and you'll lose your credibility. Again, by thinking about them, it's great to offer your positions as this is what I see as good for both of us, and here's why. And I try, it's not always easy, but I try to have in mind a script for what we're going to talk about today and a bit of information and position and thoughts on the next step. So we're going to talk about, for instance, the relationship of who does what today, the work plan. That's often a great place to start. But I'll also have in mind my deal concepts for money or for the types of terms I'd like, so that if it goes a little farther than I anticipated, I'm ready. In your team, you want to think about roles and responsibilities in the negotiations. Ideally, you do have a designated leader who really runs the negotiation. That can change, but it's good to have somebody who's sort of the gatekeeper for how the discussion goes. Your negotiator should have the ability to make some decisions without checking on things. It's not very good to negotiate if you don't have some authority, but they can be within prepared boundaries. It's often good not to have the CEO in the room, or at least not to have the board of directors in the room, because you can refer back to them and say, I don't think they're going to like this, and this is a bad idea. If they're in the room, they're under tremendous pressure to accede, so keep some power in reserve. It's great to have someone on the team who understands the consequences of a deal, who's going to say do the drug development or has done drug development, so really they can judge the practicality of things that are going on in the deal discussions. Note-taking is a wonderful thing. Indeed, I like to take notes, share very detailed notes with my team and discuss what happened and what it means and what the next step is. Use those as our memory aid, and it can get very confusing sometimes, who said what and where did we end up. I also like to take notes and provide a summary to the other side. It's a powerful tool to anchor the decision so that things can't slide. And sometimes when things get really complex, you can go back and say, but we agreed, da-da-da-da. So notes are very, very useful. So assign a note taker. Bring a lawyer in. Bring a lawyer in pretty doggone early. I'm not saying a lawyer is necessary for you to think about your business structure or the financials or many business decisions. But the instant you begin drafting, even a complicated term sheet, maybe not the first sort of conceptual term sheet or the dollars-only term sheet, but the instant there's any legal language, you want them up to speed. So you really want them to understand your aims and goals and your thought processes before they have to start drafting. It's tremendously helpful to have their expertise all the way along. It may sometimes be helpful to have access to patent lawyers as well, not necessarily at the table. So, okay, you start the negotiations typically with this sort of conceptual discussion of what the purpose of the deal is and who's going to do what, and your aims for a deal, and then somebody is going to draft a term sheet. So what is a term sheet? It can be almost anything. It can be very, very simple, but it's aimed at defining the most important terms and conditions of the partnership. It's almost always non-binding. Nobody wants to live under the simplistic things that are in the term sheet. There's too much left out. So binding term sheets are extremely uncommon, extremely rare. How's that? Term sheets can be quite short, and they can evolve to get much bigger. And typically, there are multiple rounds of term sheets, adding more details as you understand what the deal will look like. And at some point, they get big enough that everybody says, okay, there's a lot of the basics here. Let's start drafting the full agreement. Either side can start off on the first term sheet. You often hear, well, you shouldn't stick out the first term sheet because their numbers might be higher than my numbers and I don't want to limit things. That's possibly true. But there's power in writing the term sheet because you get to set the stage, and the party with the most concrete ideas often writes the first term sheet. What's in the first term sheet? The things that are most important to you. And that's built upon all your goals and BATNA and SWOTs. And it's built upon understanding of the assets, the kind of structure you want, etc. So it must include a few basic things, and it can add additional terms. And they can be added on the first term sheet or the second or third term sheet. Some of the good ones to think about are termination and diligence requirements for your asset and how decisions are made. You can start out with dollars, or you can start out with placeholders. The full agreement adds even more information. It has the things that were in the term sheet with additional legal language, and it has additional information often on things like IP prosecution, very important, how to handle new inventions. And here's where the legal language has nuances that I don't pretend to understand, and that you really, really have to rely on a good, experienced pharmaceutical lawyer. And that leads you to the partnership. So I wanted to thank ShareVault for this time and to speak a bit to some of the assets of a good electronic data room. And very important is ease of use. Remember, your diligence partners are going to come in and use this thing for a very brief time. There are going to be a bunch of different people using it. It's important for you that you can assign permissions at different levels and at different times. ShareVault, one of their claims to fame is that big documents, thousands of pages, can open quickly. So I'm going to turn it over to ShareVault, but I'd be happy to help any and all with the aspects of partnering. I focus on all sorts of aspects of partnering, from making contacts to negotiations. Thank you. Here comes John.
Thanks, Linda, for your outstanding presentation. The experience and insight that you conveyed will be valuable for any company who's getting ready for a partnering deal. We will now have a short 5-minute demo showing how ShareVault can support due diligence in a biopharma partnering scenario. After the demo, we'll move to the Q&A session with Linda. So let's get started with the demo by Amara Nicole, Senior Account Executive here at ShareVault.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Linda, for your great presentation so far. All right, so I'm going to just give everyone a quick view of ShareVault here as both an end user and an administrator who would be setting up the ShareVault. First thing that we're going to look at here is the end user experience. When they come to ShareVault, what do they see and how fast is it to access information? So right now we're logged in to an end user experience here at ShareVault, and when they log in, the left-hand side of the screen here is going to show their file index of all the documents they might have access to. To the right-hand side will be all the documents they can see and access. If you notice, all the documents are in PDF. The reason they're in PDF is so we can put all kinds of encrypted security on the documents themselves. We can block the users from saving the document, from printing, from taking screenshots, and many other features which we'll go into later. So if we were to expand the index here, we can click into any of these subcategories and see the documents related to that to the right. Another way to find documents is by our simple search feature here. If you were to type in a keyword, every document that has that word in it will show up in the search. We get a nice list of documents that contain that word. We just search for the word clinical. We have 3 results. If we were to click on one of the documents, it opens right here within our ShareVault. We get a nice image of this document, and it works a lot like a PDF, so you can scroll through it, read the document. If you notice, there's a watermark included on every single page of this document. The end user's email address, the date, and the time, and their IP address show up on every single page, discouraging them from sharing this information with others. So that's basically it for the end users. They find their documents and read them, and that's about it. So I'm going to switch here to the administrator function and show you how things are set up. Since I only have a couple minutes, I'm just going to show you basically one of the key things that my customers ask me when they sign up for ShareVault. Most of the time, they'll call in and say, we have a partnering deal and we need a data room set up tonight or tomorrow. And how long is it going to take for us to publish documents? So the good thing with ShareVault, it's very, very fast and easy. All the user has to do, or the administrator, is to click on the Publish button here at the top. A nice publishing app opens up here, and you just go to your computer, find your documents. And here's kind of some folders I might have here. All I have to do is grab the folder I want to publish. So I have this manufacturing information I might want to add to my ShareVault. I just drag and drop it over to this window. The folder is going to populate exactly like it was on your computer. You notice here we have all different kinds of files. We have PowerPoints, Words, PDFs. Doesn't really matter what type of format the document is in. ShareVault's going to automatically convert those to PDF so you can add the security and give out rights to your users. So let's say, for instance, this folder structure, you actually want that to be part of your index. All you have to do is grab the side of the folder, drag it over to the left, and now we have new index, we call them tags here at ShareVault, ready for your documents. Now you just press publish, and the documents are put into ShareVault. That fast and easy. At the top we get a status bar of the loading process, how long it's taking. And we just published 8 documents here, so it's going to be done very quickly. Once it's done, we get a pop-up window letting us know the documents that have been published. Once everything looks good to us, we select OK, and now the documents are in ShareVault that quick. So that's really kind of the #1 question users ask me. Also, can we hide this tag structure from our end users? And yes, you can. As you've seen, as an end user, we only saw a few of these tags. As an administrator, we have access to everything, so we can see the rest of the files that no one else can see. And you can give out access to those later as the partnering conversation goes along. So that's really all I have time for today. I'm going to give it back to John here and Linda and answer all your Q&A questions.
Thank you, Amber, for the quick demo of ShareVault. If you'd like to see a more in-depth demo, don't hesitate to contact us to arrange for a one-on-one session with Amber or one of our other solution specialists.
Now let's get started with Q&A. We'll start by responding to some of the questions that you've already sent in. And if you'd like to ask a question, you can go ahead and enter it into your live question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. So let's see, our first question, looking here at the list, rules of thumb such as 25% applicable equally to pharma products, biotech, and medtech?
Well, rules of thumb are always rules of thumb, so it's hard to know for sure. I think there's a broad, actually across multiple industry consensus that the originator, the discoverer, gets a 25% of profit. That's a fairly widely accepted number. Now remember, it's 25% of profit, and so what varies across industry is the profit margin. Pharma having a fairly large profit margin historically, and devices having a much smaller historic profit rate. So 25% of profits would result in a different absolute number. Next question?
Yep. Beyond the issue of comparable deals, including only those deals where the terms are disclosed, is the issue of comparable programs that tried to enlist a partner but failed to get a deal done? What do you think the ratio of failed partnering efforts to partnering efforts that result in any kind of deal?
Well, that's an interesting question, and one I haven't thought about, but it is fair that there are a lot of efforts that do not result in a deal. I think it's a dependency on time as well. Often you fail to get a deal your first go out because you haven't got the data that the partner wants. But yeah, if you were to include the zeros, the average would be yet further lowered than the published numbers.
Okay, great.
And the zeros are probably a pretty big percentage. Yep.
Okay, great. So here's another question that's come in. It says, Dear Linda, thank you for sharing your experience and thoughts and opinions. Your presentation and explanations did focus on clinical drug performance, which is an obvious prerequisite for future deals. My question is, what has been your observation on the involvement of potential market access barriers to market entry being discussed early in clinical development?
That's a big new trend. Market access reimbursements are really very important and are increasingly being asked to be thought about very, very early. And that sufficient data to warrant being paid for by insurance companies, being approved by, say, the UK NICE, the Council on Economics, are huge factors and are being asked for, and the shaping of your clinical development program to address those is a big part of your value generation, which I should have mentioned because that's a very great point. And indeed, even at the preclinical stage, they want you to have thought about that market differentiation, the will people pay for this component. So great question, and thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, so the next one we have says process to a deal shows 10 term sheets, 5 agreements, and 3 full deals signed. If 5 reached agreement, why on the 3 full deals signed? What reasons for failure after agreement? Thanks.
So I could have made that more clear. It's 5 are worked on, so you're drafting and working on full agreement, and you come to a point where you don't agree on something, and that does happen, or everything's going along hunky-dory and somebody pulls out. Remember, nothing's binding until it's inked. So, and those are only sort of illustrative numbers. They're not precise industry knowledge because I don't have that precise industry knowledge. But I think they're relatively accurate. That from my own experience, you can be working on the final agreement. You can think you're within weeks of signing a deal, and it can still fall apart because either something's changed in their strategic imperative or your strategic imperative, meaning the portfolio, the senior management, whatever has changed, or you've reached some point and you just can't stand each other anymore and you can't see a way forward. It happens, unfortunately.
Okay. The next question is, we are a small startup with a platform technology that would be of interest to both large pharma and small biotech. Could the deals for licensing the same core technology be different for these different entities? In other words, get more dollars from big pharma with deep pockets that allow small companies with little money still to have access, but perhaps have longer-term success-based dollars?
And the simple answer is yes. There are often differences in price for a deal for roughly the same asset with a small company than a big company. And that's true not just for platforms, but also for drug candidates. But clearly, if you're selling the exact same asset to multiple parties, and the big company knows you're selling it cheaper, they're not going to want to pay a lot more for it. So you have to have a means to justify your price. But yeah, it is very normal to have different prices for different parties. And the arguments are that there are other differences as well. It's not just a price difference. It's a relationship difference. But yes, it's very common to have differences in price.
Great. The next one is, I would like to know if Linda is seeking seeing an increasing number of alliance management personnel who join the due diligence process. This discipline is ultimately responsible for operationalizing the relationship and preserving the health of a partnership.
And yes, I am seeing an increased involvement in alliance management in diligence processes. Still not the norm, but often there's an introduction, at least, to the person who, after the deal is signed, would be responsible. And I think it's a great practice on both sides to have somebody involved in both diligence and possibly in negotiations who will live with the deal afterwards. So I think that's a great practice.
Great. Next question is, What are the most common reasons for a deal to fail when at the point of having a term sheet?
So if you've got agreement on the fundamental terms, what causes a deal to fail? Changing internal priorities is a big factor. Learning something new about either this particular asset or the competitive space, or a very common one is when another deal gets done and absorbs all the attention, energy, perhaps financial budget for that period. So you're working hard on a deal and all of a sudden they're all sucked off for something that sucks up all their time or all their budget. That's very common, unfortunately. Again, speed, if at all possible.
Okay. A quick question here. How do we know what files to share? Are there guidelines?
There probably is a paper somewhere about this, but I can't remember having seen one. I think the fundamental question you ask yourself is twofold. One is, what do they need to know to be able to assess my opportunity? And second, what is enabling of competition? And you have to make a balance of those two things. But typically, you can stage the access to your most sensitive information. So for instance, often you would not share IP information other than the published patents until you're pretty sure they're serious about a deal, and you might hold back filings on additional structures until really far down the line because that's really enabling new competition. You might hold back a few pieces of information, but you really do want to balance that against what do they need to know to be able to make a good assessment. And the more you hold back, the less confident they are going to be in their assessment. And one of the important things to remember is that diligence, if they are making offers in light of uncertainty, those offers will necessarily be more conservative. They're not going to stick their necks out. So the more you share and the more certain they are, the more comfortable they are to make a valid offer. Often people ask for term sheets ahead of diligence, and while that can be smart in certain circumstances, the normal phenomena is for a set of terms to go down after diligence because of that conservatism, and then they find things and they nibble down. So it's a balancing act.
Okay. What sorts of terms have you seen for drug discovery deals, e.g. screening a pharma's library for activity/toxicity?
So what terms have I seen for screening a library? Oh, that's a tough one. So if you look at the numbers on discovery deals, that's the biggest variability. The upfronts on discovery deals range from zero money, and many at 10 to 100,000, to many millions. It is much more variable than other spaces. A phase 2 deal, there's a much tighter range on the upfronts. And in part that's because for a discovery deal, one of the key questions your partner is asking is, can I replicate this? Could I do it myself? What would it cost to do it myself? Is this the only way to solve the problem? And that question drives value. So it's really hard to be certain about the value of a discovery stage deal. And it will vary by partners. So the same opportunity will be seen by one partner or one potential partner as much more valuable than another potential partner. And you see this in deals with discovery technologies. You see variation from partner to partner. So that's an important thing to think about as you're going forward, is what is your strategy and what are your I won't go there points, and what will you do if you can't go there. Great question.
Okay. So, Linda, where is a good source to look at your potential partner's former deals?
There are multiple databases that cover these sorts of things. And I subscribe to Pharma Projects and Evaluate Pharma, both of which cover deals. There's public free information, but it's harder to pull out. You can look at press releases and say biospace. You can search by keywords in Google. I do that fairly regularly, actually. Or you can subscribe to many of these databases that do track deals. They make it much easier to pull up deals by therapeutic area, deals by a certain time. It's a lot less work, but you have to pay up front to get that access. And to be honest, there's so many parameters in choosing a good database that I think you have to think hard about what makes sense for you to subscribe to some of these things, and they're expensive.
Okay. The next one is, do you have a starting point, a file folder setup template for life sciences that I can edit to fit my company and IP? I'll answer that, and then maybe Linda can address it as well. So on the ShareVault side, we definitely have some templates that you can use for your what we call tag structure, or you could call it your folder structure, for the way in which the content is organized within the data room, and we have a good starting point for partnering deals that we can work with you on. And my guess is that Linda has her own as well.
I haven't thought of it precisely as a template, but I would say that I think in terms of your partner's experts as driving the structure. So if you think about a therapeutic drug candidate, you would have preclinical folder, you'd have a toxicologist, you'd have PK and ADME, you'd have clinical development, you'd have regulatory, you'd have business issues, you'd have IP issues, and each one of those would be a separate folder because you'd have manufacturing, you'd have different people looking at those things.
So next one is, your presentation focused primarily on drug development. Could you please give us an idea on what the general picture looks like for molecular diagnostics and companion diagnostics?
That's a good question too, and I'm actually currently helping a client on exactly that question. It's actually much harder to give you a good view for diagnostics and companion diagnostics. One, the deals are smaller, and many of them don't have published terms. The databases don't cover them as well. There are fewer people with deep expertise in those spaces. It's a tougher arena to give a good assessment of value. And the business models are quite different. You see so many of the diagnostic deals are acquisitions because the way to make the biggest profit is to provide the service rather than necessarily the ownership of the IP. So it's quite a different business. And I think the main message is most of the deals are much, much smaller, maybe tenfold smaller.
Okay, so it's currently 11:59. Let's do one more question.
Great.
So, and based on what you said about the deals not closing, are there ever breakup fees paid when a term sheet does not go to closing?
Occasionally, but not commonly. There are, one can negotiate a breakup fee, one can negotiate an exclusivity fee. Sometimes I think they're disadvantageous to the small guy in that as long as you're locked up, the breakup fee comes with a cost. As long as you're locked up with them, you're not pursuing an alternative. So it's hard to get enough money from the big guys to necessarily make it worthwhile. But yes, everything is negotiable. You can do almost anything you can imagine, and that's a good thing to remember, is if you can imagine it, it is possible.
Okay, so we'll have to bring our Q&A session to an end. We realize that we did not respond to all the questions that were submitted, and we apologize for that just due to time constraints. If you asked a question that we have not yet addressed, we will follow up with you directly via email to answer your question. So now
And
let's
we
go
really
on to the final.
appreciate your time and attendance.
So the promised promotion code for the discount on ShareVault EverReady is the word readiness. So mention this to your ShareVault salesperson to receive your 25% discount. And again, thank you very much for attending the webinar, and thank you to Linda for her time and efforts.
Thanks to
And we hope
ShareVault,
to see
too.
everybody, exactly. We hope to see everybody at one of our future webinars. We do these typically every 2 to 3 months. Thank you very much.